I'm in my dirt geothermal greenhouse, which is the first greenhouse that I built here in Idaho. And when we originally built it, here in the center, we had a 4-foot wide box, and we had two 18-inch boxes on the north and one on the south. So a total of 3 boxes, two 18-inch boxes and one 4-foot box. It became very evident that a 4-foot box is not very practical. It's very difficult to harvest. You have to stretch over quite a bit, and just not a good way to go. So we removed the 4-foot box here in the center and replaced it with two 18-inch boxes, which we are grateful that we did. When I removed the 4-foot box, I put the sand and sawdust in the aisleway and then put it back in, and it mixed a lot of dirt in with it. So after a couple years of growing in the dirt, which is, really nice dirt, people would consider this, excellent garden soil. But I just prefer growing in clean sand and sawdust. We don't have any diseases or problems, anything like that. It's just that I'm just replacing this mainly dirt soil that's in the boxes with sand and sawdust. So I thought I'd share my process in doing that with you today. So as you can see, I've removed most of the dirt. I stopped just so you can get an idea of what the dirt looks like. And I'm just spreading it out in the aisleway because the aisleways have kind of settled down over the years. And so I don't have to move it very far, just spreading it around. And then I'm going to mix up my sand and sawdust. And I'm going to explain to you the difference between sand and sand and sand, and the difference between sawdust and sawdust and sawdust. Because sand is not sand and sawdust isn't sawdust. Now I've got these dirt raked out of the box, and I'm ready to put in sand and sawdust. So let's talk about the different varieties or variances in sawdust and how you know what ratio of sand and sawdust to use in your garden. I called around and talked to several different cabinet shops and pallet mills and whatever I could to find where I could get free, clean sawdust. And so I'm fortunate to be able to have lots of sawdust here, and I have it stored, so when I need it, it's already here. So I'm not trying to get sawdust when I need sawdust. So here we have 3 different bags of sawdust, and let me just show you the difference between the sawdust. You never really know what you're going to get when you go and get sawdust from a cabinet shop or somewhere else. But you can see in here, this is almost like, you can see it's really powdery here, and then we've got some shavings, so it looks like it came off of a planer, and then some really fine powder. You can see how fine this powder is here on my hands. That is not what you want to put in your garden. That is not sawdust. I mean, that's more like flour. It's so small, the particles are so small that it's just going to cake up. And I've tried this in the past where I've mixed this kind of really fine sawdust in with sand, and it just made bricks. There wasn't enough airspace for the roots to grow. However, with this mix here, I'll be perfectly fine because there's enough other large particle sawdust that I can have up to maybe 10% of the small stuff in there, and it won't affect it at all. So this bag is perfectly fine. If you had a bag of just this really small powder, you can't use it. Here's another bag. It looks like it came off of a planer also, but you can see it's much cleaner as far as it doesn't have the small particles in it. So this is really, really good stuff. It's as big as I want to go. I don't want to get much bigger. And then when I till this in with my Mantis tiller, I love the Mantis tiller. Gas powered. It's so easy to work with. I'll show you that here in a minute. But anyway, so this, when I till this in with the sand, it's going to break it up even more, but not make it powdery. And so this is a great size of sawdust to use right here. Now this is even finer. You can see it's much smaller particles than from the other bag that I just pulled out. So this will also work. This is great, and will till in with the sand just fine. What I don't want to use is something like this, which is really just wood chips. If it comes from a wood chipper, it's not sawdust. If it comes off of a bandsaw, it's going to be sawdust. So a big difference is that you want sawdust, not wood chips. And the coarseness of the sawdust is going to determine the ratio of sand that you mix with it. So let's talk about sand, because sand isn't sand isn't sand. There's very many different varieties of sand. This is concrete sand or cement sand. I actually, here in Idaho Falls, just go down to Burns Concrete and I ask for their concrete sand. And this is clean and it's just perfect. You can see there's several different sizes of sand in here. We got some really fine sand and then we got some coarser sizes. And the purpose of the sand in the mix is to create airspace so the roots have oxygen. So the organic matter, whether it's sawdust or peat moss or rice husks or coffee husks or whatever it may be, that organic matter is there to hold the water, in other words, absorb the water, hold the nutrients, hold the plant, and the sand is here to allow aeration in the soil. So make sure that you're not using blow sand or sand dune sand that's really fine, because those particles are so small that it's not going to provide the air spaces that this really just perfect mix of particles here in the concrete sand provides. Now this is the soil that I took out of the box that I'm now putting in my walkway, and you can see it's actually quite good soil. I mean, people would actually pay for this soil here. When I put it in my hand, it compacts, but it still falls apart, so it's not going to be a problem. My cat wants to get in here just a second. So this is actually a good mixture. When I'm mixing sawdust and sand, I'm really trying to come up with the same feel as high grade potting mix. And let's take a look at that. Here's some potting mix in here. This is primarily sphagnum peat moss. It's got some perlite in there, which you can see the white particles. It feels like there's dirt, or in other words sand in there. So this is actually kind of a very light mix, a little bit heavier than I'd want for if I was doing custom soil, but this is good. Now you notice it has the perlite. So if you've got a mix of sand and sawdust and you really are concerned that the sand is too fine or the sawdust is too fine, go ahead and add some perlite to the mix, and that perlite will help break up the compactness of the soil and allow airspace. So you can also add perlite to your soil. I don't, because I get a good mix of sand and sawdust and I don't need the perlite. But if you don't have the optimal mix and you need to add some more aeration, just get some perlite. Don't use anything else, just the perlite. So let me mix some sand and sawdust together so you see what I'm looking for when I'm doing this. I'm just going to get a can, whatever kind of can I have. I'm just going to fill it up. This is my measuring device. It's filled to the top. And now I'm going to use this sand as the foundation for my mix. I'm going to put it in a wheelbarrow, or you can put it in a bucket. That's 1 can of sand. I'm going to come to this big bag of sawdust here and fill it up by volume. I'm not doing it by weight. I'm just going to fill it just to the top like I did with the sand. There we go. So that's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. Now I'm going to add some water to it just to get it moist and see how it feels. So there's some water. Don't need to put a lot in. And I'm just going to mix it around and see if I get that really nice mixture of sand and sawdust. I feel right now that it's way too sandy for me. Although there have been other mixes of sand and sawdust that I've done a 1-to-1 ratio. This is too sandy. That means the water's going to run right through it. There's not enough organic material in here to hold the water, to hold the plant properly. So I know a 1-to-1 ratio isn't good for what I have here. It's time to get some more sawdust. So another full can of sawdust, sprinkle it in there. and I'm going to mix around in that sand and sawdust moist mixture and see how that feels. Does this feel, this is feeling much better already. I like that it's holding together. I feel it's not too heavy. It feels actually really good. It feels a little heavy. There's a lot of moisture in there, but it's holding together. So if this got wet and had a plant in it, I think it would hold together very well. I'm just mixing this up by hand, and it's really by feel. So you want it to feel like an expensive bag of potting mix. Okay, still feels too sandy for me. I feel like the water is just going to run through it, and if that's the case and not stay in there, I'm just going to wash the nutrients out. So I'm going to get another can of sawdust. All right, so I've got 3 cans of sawdust here to 1 can of sand, and let's see how this feels as I mix it together. It isn't really scientific. It's not done by weight, it's just done by feel. Okay, I'm liking how this is feeling better. It doesn't feel like it's too airy. In other words, the water isn't going to run through too fast. It's certainly not as heavy as the soil, the dirt that I took out, but that's feeling good. All right, so that is actually feeling really good. I'm really happy with that mix. I'm going to try 1 more can of sawdust and see how that feels, if that's just too much sawdust to the sand. But this is feeling really good. All right, you can kind of see, I'm trying to show you what it kind of looks like in my hand. Now if I had smaller sawdust, it would look completely different, and I may have to add some perlite to it, but right now it's feeling good. Let's try 1 more can. All right, so here we have 4 cans of sawdust to 1 can of sand, and as I have helped literally hundreds of people put in their gardens, we've done this a lot, and sometimes it literally is a 1-to-1 ratio. Sometimes it's a 2-to-1 ratio, sawdust to sand, 3-to-1 ratio, 4-to-1 ratio. It really depends on the different styles of sawdust and the different styles of sand. So whatever is available in your community that's cheap or free and clean and available, I'd recommend that. All right, I'm really liking this. I'm really liking 4-to-1 ratio with this particular sawdust and this particular sand. So that's what I'm going to stick with. I think there's enough organic material in here to absorb the water and hold it, to hold the nutrients, to hold the plant. There's enough sand in here to allow proper aeration. So I'm going to go with a 4-to-1 ratio. Yeah, that's going to work out excellent. So I have my mixture now. For this particular case, I'm going to go 4-to-1. Now I can start filling up my box. I'm going to now go big scale and use my wheelbarrow as my measuring device. So I will put in 4 wheelbarrowfuls of sawdust and 1 wheelbarrow full of sand, and then till it in. Let me show you how that looks. All right, so here is my sawdust. What my wife likes to do is she will take the sawdust and sand and mix it in the wheelbarrow by a shovel. That way she's really accurate in her measurements. 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 2-to-1, whatever it is. I just like to put it in the box and let the mantis tiller do all the work, let the machine do the work. I know that this sawdust here is very light, and so it means it's going to compact. So you can see that it's actually up over the edges of the box, and I'm anticipating that it's going to compact, and so I'm adding more of this lightweight sawdust than I would with the smaller particle sawdust. Now I'm going to go get my 4-to-1 ratio wheelbarrow full of sand. So I've had 2 wheelbarrows full of sand here, so that means that I'm going to get a half of a wheelbarrow full of sand. So here you can see I just took the half wheelbarrow of sand and I just poured it right on top of the sawdust. I put the sand in after the sawdust when I'm mixing it in the box, because if I put the sand in first and the sawdust on top, it'd be really hard to get the sawdust to mix with the sand because it's already on the bottom and it's heavier and it's smaller particles. My wife would have gotten 5-gallon buckets and done the ratio and mixed it in the wheelbarrow. So now I'm going to mix it with the Mantis tiller. I am assuming this is going to compact down, and I'll probably have to top it off with a little bit more sand and sawdust. Because there's so much really kind of fine sawdust in this, I'm watering it down just to keep the dust down as I'm mixing it with the tiller. So I'm going to give it a little bit of water, not a lot, just to dampen it and keep the dust down here in the greenhouse while I till it with the Mantis tiller. I'm not soaking it, just getting it wet. Okay, that should be enough to keep the dust down. And let's till. Now that I've got my sawdust and sand mixed in and I've got it screeded, I want to add my pre-plant mix and my weekly feed. So what I'm going to do is simply get an old can that we use. I'll put it on the scale so it zeroes out. I've got 10 feet here. I know that I need 1 ounce of pre-plant mix for every 1 foot of garden space in a 18 wide box. So I'm going to grab another can or measuring device, and I need 10 ounces. So let me just get a tear on here and put 10 ounces in. $9.9, 10. Okay, so I got 10 ounces of pre-plant. I'm simply going to sprinkle this from side to side all the way down this 10-foot section. Okay, so the pre-plant is now done. Now it's time for the weekly feed. I'm going to put in half the amount, so half an ounce per linear foot, sprinkle it into the garden area that I'm preparing for planting, and then I'll till it again. Okay, so the box is done. Of course, if I were growing in a soil bed, I would not be adding any sawdust or sand. I'd just grow in the dirt. I would add the pre-plant mix and the weekly feed, just like I did here in the box. But I want you to take a look at this sawdust and sand mix, this soil mix, this custom soil mix. Look how perfect it is. If I would have used the other bag of purchased potting mix, it would cost me hundreds and hundreds of dollars, several $100 just to fill this one box. Probably just this 10-foot area. Probably it cost me $200-300. I could use garden dirt from the garden center, or I can just use sawdust and sand. The sawdust was free. The sand cost me $14 a cubic yard. I used half a wheelbarrow full, so it probably cost me in materials $1 or $2 for this 10-foot area. At the very most, maybe less than $1. The reason why I recommend using sawdust and sand is because it's disease-free, bug-free, it's local, it's available, and it works really, really well. You can use other soil. You can just put dirt in here. That's perfectly fine. But I would rather use clean, inexpensive soil that I can mix myself and control the quality of the soil that I'm growing in. So you notice that the particles are now much smaller. So with that tiller and grinding in the tilling tines and in the sand, it actually makes it much smaller, makes it just a beautiful, beautiful growing medium. So if you want to grow in boxes, you might consider using sawdust and sand, adding your nutrients to the sawdust and sand, and then growing your plants in there, because this is just perfect material right here. I just could not be happier with how this turned out. I know that my plants will do exceptionally well in this nice, loose, custom soil that I just created that will hold the moisture, hold the plants, keep the garden cool in the summer, warmer in the winter, and in the fall and the early spring, and provide everything that my plants need for support and nutrition through feeding it weekly and prepping the soil with the pre-plant and the weekly feed. This is LDSPrepper reminding you, if ye are prepared, ye shall not fear.